problem with smuggling illicit, morally ambiguous cargo is that, eventually, the cargo develops a conscience. Or, in Hicks Vaclav's case, it has one for you, and that conscience looks a lot like a tiger-faced pangolin with the emotional stability of a dying star and an appetite that could bankrupt a small, well-funded moon. The thought occurred to him precisely as a sharp zap echoed from the corner of the grimy port office, followed by a plaintive yelp. Hicks didn't flinch, keeping his gaze locked on the wavering, gelatinous mound of questionable business ethics across the counter. "Spikes," he said, his voice a low warning that didn't interrupt his negotiation. "If you short out the station's atmospheric controls again, I'm trading you for a nav computer that doesn't try to chew its way through the bulkhead." A soft, contrite chirp was his only answer. "Boral, my friend, my confidant, my favorite sentient puddle of fermented swamp gas," Hicks continued, leaning his hip against the counter. The metal was cool, even through his worn trousers. "Let's dispense with the pageantry. You and I both know that shipment of nutritional supplements was grade A military-spec ration paste, the kind of stuff a quartermaster gets vaporized for losing. So let's skip the part where you insult my intelligence and jump to the part where you transfer the credits." Boral, a creature that perpetually seemed to be in the process of melting, gurgled. A cheap synth voice emitter on the counter crackled to life. The manifest stated reprocessed protein slurry. The value reflects this. "The manifest was a masterpiece of creative accounting," Hicks retorted. "A work of fiction that would make the galactic bard weep with professional envy. I risked getting my ship, the Stray Dog, turned into a very pretty, very expensive cloud of incandescent gas for this. 4,000 credits. That's the price." Just then, the lights in the office flickered violently. A low, groaning sound came from the docking clamp controls on the wall, the same wall Spikes was currently trying to hide behind. Hicks felt a familiar dread pool in his gut. The Stray Dog's primary coolant pump, the very reason he needed this payday, was probably having another seizure. He had to close this deal. Now. The blob jiggled, a universal sign of avaricious recalculation. "The merchandise is perishable, and your vessel appears distressed. 3,500. Final offer." "Done," Hicks snapped, holding out a data chip before Boral could factor the imminent engine failure into the price. The credits chimed into his account. Hicks scooped up the source of the ozone smell, the scaly, armored cub with a tiger's face and inquisitive ears, who was now trying to look exceptionally innocent while subtly pushing a smoking panel back into place with his hind foot. "Don't even start," Hicks muttered, tucking the creature under his arm. Spikes' 6-inch quills lay flat against his back in a picture of feigned obedience. "Your cute-to-chaos ratio is dangerously unbalanced." He strode out into the main concourse of Station Epsilon 9. It was a testament to repurposed decay, a hollowed-out asteroid where the air tasted of fried synth grub, ozone, and the faint metallic tang of desperation. Neon signs in a dozen languages flickered over stalls selling everything from stolen ship parts to black market cybernetics. His eyes immediately found the stall he was looking for, its sign promising refurbished ship components. In the window, polished under a focused light, sat a Mark IV coolant pump. The price tag read 3,500 credits, exactly his take. Relief washed over him, cool and clean. He could fix the dog. He could get out of this backwater system and find a real score. Then he remembered. A few stalls down, tucked between a weapons dealer and a purveyor of counterfeit memories, was a small, shadowy booth. This was the real reason he'd come to Epsilon 9, a station known as the gray market hub for rare and restricted biologicals. he'd used half his starting capital just to get a meeting with the dealer. After 6 months of trial and error, of Spikes getting sick on every standard nutrient paste, a desperate, deep-net diagnostic had finally given him a species name, Athelian, and a terrifyingly complex dietary requirement list. The dealer, a shrouded figure with too many eyes, recognized him. Without a word, he pushed a single, unmarked canister across the counter. It was heavy, dense. The price, scrawled on a sticky tab, was 3,000 credits. Hicks looked at the canister, then back toward the ship parts stall. He could see the coolant pump from here, a beacon of safety and solvency. The dog's last pump failure had nearly cooked him alive in the cockpit. The choice pitted his livelihood, and likely his life, against the well-being of the little gremlin currently purring against his ribs. The purr sounded like rocks in a tin can, a rumbling, comforting vibration that had become the background noise of his life. With a groan that emanated from the very core of his financial despair, he slapped the credits down for the food. The coolant pump would have to wait. He'd just have to be extra careful on takeoff and landing, and every moment in between. "You," he told Spikes as they walked back toward the docking bay, the heavy canister weighing down his arm and his spirits, "are the single most expensive, non-sentient, emotionally manipulative life form I have ever had the misfortune to rescue." Spikes responded by butting his armored head affectionately against Hicks's chin. The quills tickled. Hicks couldn't suppress a weary smile. The conscience was a terrible business partner, but the company wasn't half bad. The stray dog was less a ship and more a collection of grievances held together by creative engineering and stubbornness. The cockpit smelled of old coffee, ozone, and Spikes. A faded photo of a nebula he'd once dreamed of visiting was taped to a console, and the co-pilot seat had permanent claw marks in the synth leather. It was home. Hicks had just settled into the worn pilot's chair and watched Spikes dive headfirst into his bowl of obscenely expensive paste when the proximity alarm didn't just blare, it shrieked. It wasn't the chaotic signature of pirates or the steady, rhythmic ping of a station patrol. This was the clean, overwhelming energy signature of military-grade power, of wealth. On the main viewer, 3 ships resolved from the blackness of space. They were less machines and more sculptures of deadly grace. Sleek, pearlescent vessels whose hulls seemed carved from polished bone, glowing with a soft internal light. Valen, Imperial Navy. A stillness settled in Hicks's veins. It was the feeling he got just before a deal went sour, a sudden internal pressure drop that signaled imminent vacuum. He was in the kind of trouble that didn't just get you killed, it got you erased from history. "Okay, Spikes, new plan," he said, his hands moving across the console, flicking switches to shut down non-essential systems. "We played dumb. You're a rare space hamster with a skin condition. I'm a deeply unintelligent but charming rogue who took a wrong turn at Procyon 5. Got it?" Spikes paused, a smear of brownish paste on his whiskered snout, and let out a questioning squeak. The comm channel opened without his permission. The face of a Valen royal guard filled the screen, his features sharp and severe in a helmet of silver and amethyst. "Unidentified vessel, you are in violation of an Imperial cordon. By order of Her Imperial Majesty, Empress Varza Kathir, you will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Do not resist." The transmission cut. Hicks stared at the screen, his mind racing. The Empress? What in the 7 hells did the ruler of the most powerful matriarchy in the galaxy want with him? Then he understood. The flare hadn't come from the station. It was the plasma. When Spikes had shorted the panel, he must have let out a burst of adolescent Athelian energy, a psychic flare bright enough to be seen across the sector, a flare she had clearly been searching for. For 6 agonizing months, the galactic news feeds had been filled with whispers about the Empress. After a violent, failed coup attempt on her royal transport near the Cinder debris field, the same field where he'd found the pod, she had grown reclusive, her public appearances rare and her demeanor increasingly cold. The official story was that she was consolidating power. The rumor was that she had lost something in the attack, something irreplaceable. A heavy metallic thud echoed through the hull as a docking clamp latched onto the stray dog. The airlock began its cycle. Hicks stood, placing his body between the inner door and Spikes, who had frozen, the fur along his spine bristling. The cub's quills began to rise, a low hiss escaping his lips. The airlock door slid open with a sound too smooth and silent for his gritty ship. 2 royal guards in their ornate, polished armor stepped through first, their energy rifles held at a low, professional ready. Their presence was a violation, an annexation of his space, their sterile perfection highlighting the scuffs and stains of Hicks's life. They flanked a woman who didn't just enter the room, she commandeered it. She was tall and impossibly regal, wrapped in a gown of deep purple that seemed to drink the dingy light of his cockpit and turn it into something noble. A delicate silver circlet was the only crown she wore. Her skin had a faint lustrous quality. Her ears were elegantly pointed, and her eyes were the color of flawless amethysts, and they were fixed on the small creature cowering behind Hicks's legs. Her legendary composure, the bedrock of her reign, shattered. It was a hairline fracture, a tremor so minute only someone standing 3 meters away could see it, but it was there. A single word, a breath of sound filled with 6 months of hidden anguish and desperate, disbelieving hope escaped her lips. Then, Hicks felt a jolt through his entire body, a phantom echo of recognition, of joy, of home that was profoundly, shockingly, not his own. He looked from the Empress to the trembling cub at his feet. Spikes. Fen. Oh, this is bad. Empress Varza took a single fluid step forward, her hand outstretched, palm up. Her regal mask was already reasserting itself, but her eyes remained locked on the cub, wells of raw emotion in a face carved from marble. Come, Fen. It is over. You are safe now. Spikes flattened himself against the grimy deck plating, a guttural hiss vibrating through the floor. His back quills, each a needle-sharp point, rose straight up. A faint, menacing orange glow began to pulse at their tips. Easy there, buddy, Hicks murmured, not taking his eyes off the Empress. He knelt slowly, a gesture of non-aggression. He's, a little protective. That, Varza said, her voice as cold and clear as deep space, is not a he. That is an Athelian, and that is my Fen. The emphasis was not on ownership, but on a pain so deep it had become possessive. She took another step. The quills flared with white-hot intensity. A scintillating ball of plasma, no bigger than Hicks's fist, spat from the cub's mouth. The shot was precise, a clear warning. It impacted the bulkhead a hand's breadth from Varza's shoulder, leaving a sizzling, molten crater in the metal. The royal guards snapped their rifles to their shoulders in perfect unison. Whoa! Hicks yelled, throwing his hands up. Everybody stand down. He's just a kid with defense-grade plasma reflex, but still a kid. Varza didn't flinch. An older Veylan in the formal robes of a physician who had been standing behind her stepped forward, his face etched with concern. Your Majesty, if I may. Varza gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The physician, Brennan, produced a handheld scanner and aimed it at Spikes. The cub growled but stayed behind Hicks's legs, a warm, vibrating bastion of terrified loyalty. A complex holographic display flickered in the air, a web of pulsating light connecting 3 points. Brennan stared at the data, his brow furrowing deeper with every passing second. "Extraordinary," he whispered.
"Speak plainly, Brennan,"
Varza commanded, her voice strained. "Your Majesty," the physician began, his tone turning grave. "When Fen was lost, the primary bond was not severed. It was merely rendered dormant by trauma and distance. Now, in the intervening months, a secondary, provisional bond has formed with the human." Hicks felt a knot of pure dread tighten in his stomach. "So? Unform it!" Brennan looked at him with an expression of pity, but his gaze kept flicking to the glowing hologram, his mind clearly racing to comprehend the phenomenon. "It is not that simple. Fen is entering adolescent coalescence. It is the most volatile psychic period of an Athelian's life. The new bond has not replaced the old one. It has woven itself into it. The three of you are now a psychic tripod. Each of you is a leg." Before anyone could react, one of the guards, seeing Hicks as the source of the problem, took a step toward him, raising his rifle in a clear gesture of intent. "Human, you will come with us." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The moment the guard's intent focused on separating them, a bolt of pure agony shot through Hicks's skull. He cried out, stumbling to one knee. Across the cockpit, Empress Varza gasped, her hand flying to her temple, her face paling. And Spikes collapsed onto the deck, his body convulsing in a violent seizure, his quills flickering erratically between fiery orange and deathly blue. "Stop!" Brennan shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Do not attempt to separate them. Can you not see?" He gestured to the screaming hologram, where the lines connecting the 3 points were flashing a violent, unstable red. To sever any one of them from the whole, especially now, would trigger a fatal psychic schism. The feedback would extinguish the Athelian's life force instantly. He looked from Varza's pained face to Hicks's, and the psychic backlash would likely cause severe, irreparable neurological damage to you both. The guard froze. The silence that fell in the cockpit was absolute, broken only by Spikes' whimpering gasps as the seizure subsided, and the ragged sound of Hicks and an Empress breathing in unison. Varza's face was a canvas of controlled devastation. Finding her companion was supposed to be the end of an agonizing chapter. Instead, the book had been torn from her hands and rewritten in a language of impossible complications. For a fleeting second, Hicks saw the immense weight of it all crash down on her. The loneliness he'd only read about in news feeds was there, raw and visible, in the slight slump of her shoulders. Then, the Empress returned. The air in the room seemed to crystallize around her. The ambient warmth of a moment ago vanished, replaced by an imperial chill that seemed to emanate directly from her, making the hairs on his arms rise. She looked at him, and he was no longer a person, but a problem on a strategic map. She made a raw, emotional, desperate gambit born from a corner she never anticipated.
"Guards,"
she said, her voice ringing with hard-won authority.
"The human and the Athelian are to be transferred to the Ascendant. They will be quartered in the secondary royal suite. Post a full watch."
Hicks's jaw dropped. "Whoa, hold on. A suite? I'm not checking into a resort. Spikes and I are a package deal, and we're not for sale. Or for imperial kidnapping." The full weight of her 1,000-year-old empire pressed down on him as she stepped closer.
"Your life as a derelict smuggler with a stray pet is over.
she stated, her voice a low, dangerous whisper meant for him alone.
"You have stumbled into the heart of the Ascendancy. You are now an Imperial problem, Hicks Vaclav."
She leaned in, her amethyst eyes inches from his.
"And I will solve you."
The transfer to the flagship Ascendant was a surreal blur of silent, imposing guards and corridors so clean he felt like he was contaminating them just by breathing. He was marched through halls of polished, psychically resonant material, the Valen crew turning to stare at the dusty human and his bizarre armored pet. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The secondary royal suite was larger than his entire ship. The walls were of glowing, cream-colored material that pulsed with a soft internal light. The air hummed with a quiet power. Spikes, recovering his nerve, immediately decided this was a grand new playground and began investigating a priceless-looking tapestry. Hicks, however, was pacing. Oh, this is bad. This is get quietly dropped into a black hole bad. Before his anxiety could reach critical mass, Varza swept into the room, her expression a thundercloud.
"There is a complication."
"Let me guess," Hicks said, not breaking his stride. "The 5-star accommodations don't have room service that serves synthale?" She ignored his flippancy.
"An urgent binding summons from the High Council. They demand my immediate return to Valeth."
Her lips thinned into a hard, unforgiving line.
"They are citing my prolonged and obsessive search as a sign of emotional instability. This has Duke Torvin's manipulative stench all over it."
Duke? Let me guess, not a fan?"
"He reveres my father's memory of cold, unyielding stoicism," she said, her voice clipped. "He believes emotion is a contagion, and I am the source of the plague. He has outmaneuvered me. I intended to keep you and Fen isolated here, aboard my ship, until Brennan could find a solution, but now—"
A cold, sinking feeling hit Hicks. "And us?" Varza's gaze was hard as diamond.
"The bond requires proximity. You are coming with me. You are about to walk into the heart of my court, a nest of political vipers who will see you as living proof of my weakness. Do try not to get us both executed before lunch."
The trip to Valeth was a tense, silent plunge into the heart of the Empire. The ship didn't land in a city. It descended into a colossal mountain that seemed to be a single, fused mineral, a unified structure that was both palace and capital. The Imperial Palace glowed from within, a symphony of soft, shifting colors. As Hicks stepped onto the docking platform, a wave of anxiety, sharp and piercing, hit him. It wasn't his. He glanced at Varza. Her face was a serene mask, but her hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. He looked up at the towering, vaulted ceiling of the grand hall. The materials of the walls, which had been glowing with a soft, welcoming gold, subtly dimmed, shifting to a cooler, more troubled shade of blue. No one else seemed to notice, but Hicks felt it. He was a walking, talking barometer for the Empress's emotional state. This was going to be an absolute disaster. He was shown to his quarters, an opulent suite that was, he soon discovered, connected to Empress Varza's personal chambers by a single, heavily guarded door. It was the most beautiful cage he had ever seen. A short time later, 2 palace functionaries arrived. One carried a tray of folded silks, the other a small, velvet-lined box. "Imperial regulation requires all residents of the royal wing to wear appropriate attire and a security monitoring bracelet," the first one intoned, offering the clothes. He ignored the silks, his eyes fixed on the bracelet the second functionary held out. It was a simple, elegant band of silver, but to Hicks, it was a manacle. It looked just like the indenture tracker they'd welded to his wrist in the mines. 5 years of his life, measured by a blinking light on a metal cuff he couldn't remove. No, the functionary blinked. Sir, it is not a request. He stepped forward. The moment the man's hand came toward his wrist, something inside Hicks snapped. A cold, claustrophobic terror clawed its way up his throat. He reacted without thinking, his body moving with the desperate violence of a cornered animal. He shoved the functionary back, hard, sending him stumbling into his colleague. The box clattered to the floor. "Get away from me!" Hicks snarled, backing away until his shoulders hit the wall. The room felt like it was shrinking, the air turning thick and heavy. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The functionaries drew themselves up, their expressions turning from surprise to outrage. Before they could call the guards, Varza appeared in the connecting doorway. She took in the scene in an instant. Hicks pressed against the wall, breathing hard, his eyes wide with a panic that was clearly not about a simple piece of jewelry. The flustered officials, the bracelet on the floor.
"Leave us,"
she commanded. The functionaries bowed stiffly and scurried out. Varza didn't move from the doorway. Hicks could feel her confusion, a questioning pulse through the bond.
"It is merely a security measure,"
she said, her tone cautious. "I don't wear chains," Hicks bit out, the words raw. "Not anymore." She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, the psychic link carried more than just raw emotion. She felt an echo of his terror, a ghostly flash of a dark, cramped space, the scent of metallic dust, and the feeling of absolute hopelessness. Her eyes widened slightly with a dawning, horrified understanding. She gave a slow nod.
"Very well,"
she said softly.
"There will be no bracelet."
She turned and left, leaving Hicks alone, leaning against the wall, his own past a fresh, open wound in the gilded cage of his present. To his surprise, Varza did not confine him to his room. Instead, she seemed to believe the best way to manage her new problem was to inflict it upon her court. His education in Valen customs began the next day, overseen by a tutor named Corinne, a stern older woman with a spine of solid tradition and a gaze that could curdle cream. Hicks was fairly certain she was a Torvin loyalist.
"The consort's role is one of silent support,"
Corinne instructed, her voice crisp as autumn leaves. They were in one of the palace's smaller libraries, the air thick with the scent of ancient paper and polished walls. The walls around them glowed a placid, studious blue.
"You will walk 3 paces behind Her Majesty. You will not speak unless spoken to, and you will never, under any circumstances, initiate physical contact."
"Got it," Hicks said. "Be seen, not heard, and definitely don't touch the living deity. What about smiling? Is that a capital offense or just heavily fined?" Corinne's lips thinned.
"Your human penchant for levity is unbecoming."
"It's one of my best features," Hicks countered. "That and my ability to hotwire a cargo freighter in under 3 minutes. Bet you didn't learn that in consort school." Their sessions were a daily war of attrition. Corinne would lecture on the 1,000-year history of the tea ceremony, and Hicks would ask if they had anything stronger. She would explain the subtle political language of fan placement, and he would use his as a mock air guitar. Spikes, who was required to be nearby, seemed to view these lessons as a personal challenge, often trying to help by knocking over priceless artifacts or attempting to nest in Corinne's severe, perfectly coiffed hair. Hicks was chafing against the rigid structure, the endless rules, the sheer, suffocating weight of tradition. He began studying the palace schematics he could access on a public data slate, noting service corridors and guard shift patterns. The old, familiar urge to run was a constant itch under his skin. He even mapped a route to the hangars, but every time he seriously considered it, a wave of distress from Spikes would ripple through the bond, a miserable, anxious feeling that was echoed by a faint, lonely ache from Varza's direction. He was trapped by something stronger than walls, a connection he was beginning to realize he didn't want to break. In a private, shielded chamber deep within his family's wing of the palace mountain, Duke Torvin stood before a life-size hologram of a woman who was not Varza, that wavered as if seen through heat. It was her mother, the late Empress Seraphine, captured in a moment of regal serenity.
"She is just like you were,"
Torvin murmured, his voice a low thrum of old pain.
"So much potential, so much power, and so susceptible to the poison of sentiment."
His aide, a young, ambitious lord named Andros, stood silently by the door.
"The terraforming station in the Siren sector reports critical supply shortages, my lord. The atmospheric processes will begin to fail within the week."
Torvin didn't turn.
"My blockades on the supply routes are holding then?"
"Perfectly, my lord. The sector administrator, a staunch Varza loyalist, is panicking. He has formally requested emergency aid from the throne. The blame for the coming crisis will fall squarely on the Empress's distracted leadership."
"It is not a coming crisis, Andros,"
Torvin corrected, his voice hardening.
"It is a controlled burn. I am demonstrating the inevitable consequence of a reign guided by feeling instead of function."
He finally turned from the hologram, his eyes cold and clear.
"When my Seraphine let her grief over a lost battle cloud her judgment, she signed a treaty that cost us the mineral rights to 10 systems. A moment of emotion that crippled our economy for a generation. I will not allow her daughter to repeat that mistake with this creature, this human pet."
His love for the dead Empress had twisted, metastized over the years into a fanatical conviction. He wasn't just seizing power. In his mind, he was performing a painful but necessary surgery to save the Empire from itself.
"The Uglar ambassador arrives tomorrow to finalize their treaty,"
Andros reported.
"Another one of her sentimental projects. She believes trust can bind them to us."
Torvin allowed himself a thin, cruel smile.
"Trust is a vapor. Contracts are stone. See to it that the official court translator assigned to the human develops a glitch, something to demonstrate the chaos that follows in his wake. Let us see how her trust survives a public diplomatic catastrophe."
The Ulgar Treaty Chamber was a cavern of polished jet-black stone designed to impress the rock-skinned warriors. The mineral walls outside the chamber's apertures glowed a tense, diplomatic blue-green. Torvin was present, radiating smug disapproval from the sidelines. Varza was negotiating the final clauses with the Ulgar ambassador, a hulking specimen named Horg. Hicks stood 3 paces behind her, as instructed, feeling utterly useless. He'd been fitted with a standard-issue court translator earpiece. It felt strange not to be relying on his own cheap black-market tech. Horg seemed pleased with the terms. He let out a series of guttural clicks and raised his upper 2 hands, palms facing Varza, in a short, sharp bow, a clear gesture of respect. Then, the court translator, which was linked to the room's ambient audio system for clarity, spoke. Its voice, a smooth, synthesized baritone, echoed through the chamber.
"Gesture of ultimate fealty. To seal this pact, the Empress's consort must now perform the rite of dominance and mount the Empress."
The silence in the room was
absolute and instantaneous. Every eye, Valen, Ulgar, and otherwise, swiveled to Hicks. He froze, his mind a blue screen of death. Torvin's jaw tightened, but a brief, triumphant light shone in his eyes. This was better than he had hoped. Varza went rigid. She didn't look at Hicks. She couldn't. The public humiliation was so acute it felt as if the air had been forced from her lungs.
"There seems to be,"
she began, her voice dangerously steady,
"a malfunction in the translation system."
The translator, however, decided to be helpful. Correction. The rite of dominance is a celebratory, public mounting to demonstrate the vigor and fertility of the ruling pair. A horrified gasp came from somewhere in the back. Hicks felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in his throat. This was so much worse than his own crappy translator. This was a targeted assassination by comedy. Spikes, who had been sleeping under the treaty table, sensed the spike of pure, unadulterated chaos. He skittered out with an excited chirp and, seeing Horg as the center of attention, proceeded to climb up the ambassador's leg as if he were a fascinating, rocky tree. Horg looked down at the cub, then at the mortified humans, and let out a series of confused clicks. The translator chimed in again. Query: is the small spiny one the designated mounter? That broke the dam. Hicks choked on a laugh he could no longer suppress. Varza shot him a look that promised a slow, painful death, but he could see the tremor in her shoulders. She was fighting a battle against laughter, and she was losing. The situation devolved into a frantic, diplomatic nightmare. It took 10 agonizing minutes, with Varza trying to formally apologize while Hicks attempted to detach a playful Spikes from Horik's thigh, for the Olgar to understand the concept of malicious code in a translation system. Finally, Horg let out a deep, rumbling sound that turned out to be a laugh. He clapped a massive, stony hand on Hicks's shoulder, nearly driving him to his knees. He declared, through a now verified interpreter, that any empire that could weaponize bad translators showed a cunning he could respect. The treaty was signed, sealed with a spirit of shared victory over technological terrorism. As the delegations filed out, Torvin swept past Varza, his voice a venomous whisper. The circus continues to amuse, Your Majesty, but the Siren Sector starves while you play with your pets. The barb hit its mark. The golden glow of their brief amusement vanished from the walls, replaced by a stormy gray. But later that night, as Hicks was trying to explain to Spikes why ambassadors were not climbing gems, he felt a flicker through the bond, a distant, private echo of Varza's memory of the translator's final, absurd question, and with it a pulse of pure, unadulterated mirth. Sleep was a luxury in the palace. Few nights later, Hicks found himself awake again, the quiet hum of the living mountain a constant presence. The Empress's bed was empty. A faint, psychic pull of melancholy led him from his own chambers, through the connecting door, and into her private wing. He found her in the royal conservatory. It was a vast, glass-domed chamber filled with alien flora that pulsed and glowed with their own soft internal light. The air was warm and smelled of damp earth and exotic night-blooming blossoms. The material of the ceiling above was a deep, star-dusted indigo, reflecting her mood. Varza stood before a wall of cascading, phosphorescent moss, her simple silk robe a stark contrast to the regal armor she wore during the day.
"You should not be here,"
she said without turning. The list of places I should not be is getting impressively long, Hicks replied, stuffing his hands in his pockets. I'm thinking of having it printed on a t-shirt.
He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. Torvin got to you today. She finally turned, her amethyst eyes reflecting the soft blue light of a nearby fungus.
He uses my people's suffering as a weapon against me. He believes my father's way was the only way. Stoicism, control, an empress whose heart is a fortress.
She looked away, her gaze lost in the glowing foliage.
I find myself afraid. Not of Torvin. I am afraid he is right, that this connection, this feeling, is a weakness that will be the ruin of us all.
The confession hung in the fragrant air. Hicks thought of the silver bracelet on the floor, of the cold panic that still lived in his bones. When I was a kid, he said softly, his voice different here in the quiet dark. My parents signed me into an indenture with a mining corporation. 5 years. They called it a work contract. I called it a cage. He instinctively touched the back of his neck, where a corporate logo was still faintly scarred into his skin. The day I got out, I swore I would never be owned again. Not by a corp, not by a contract, not by anyone. He met her gaze. You're afraid your heart is weakness. I'm afraid of cages. He's trying to put us both in one. Varza looked at him, and the space between them seemed to shrink. A fragile, unexpected bridge of shared understanding formed in the glowing forest. It was a dangerous, hopeful thing.
The situation in the Siren sector is critical,
Varza announced to her advisors the next morning. The light in the strategy room was a turbulent, anxious gray.
Torvin's administrative blockade is holding. He's daring me to break it with force, which would be seen as an act of civil war, or let my people suffer, which he will frame as incompetence. I will not give him either victory.
What is your plan, Your Majesty? Brennan asked, his face grim.
I will go myself, she declared. I will take a single, fast courier ship with medical supplies and nutrient paste. It will be a humanitarian mission, not a military one. Let him try to find a vessel carrying aid.
Her advisors protested vehemently. It was too risky, but she was resolute, and where she went, Hicks and Spikes had to follow. The journey was swift. The courier ship was a sleek dart compared to the stray dog. They were nearing the failing terraforming station when the universe erupted in violence. 3 mercenary ships, retrofitted freighters bristling with illegal cannons, dropped out of the shadow of a barren moon. Plasma bolts tore through the space between them. "They're not Valen Navy!" the pilot shouted over the scream of alarms. "They're not trying to disable us! They're trying to vaporize us!" Hicks saw the situation not as a soldier, but as a smuggler. He hired killers to do his dirty work. Plausible deniability. Their pilot was good, a veteran of the Imperial Guard, but they were horrifically outgunned. A bolt of coherent plasma slammed into the port engine. The ship screamed, shuddering violently as emergency lights painted the cockpit in blood-red flashes. "We've lost primary power!" the pilot yelled. "Brace for impact! I'm aiming for the moon!" The crash was a symphony of screaming metal and shattering material. Hicks was thrown against his restraints, his head snapping back, the world dissolving into a universe of white pain. He came to with a groan, the air thick with the acrid tang of smoke and ozone. The cockpit was a mangled wreck, half buried in gray lunar dust. Varza was stirring nearby, pushing herself up, a cut bleeding freely on her forehead. The ship's outer hull groaned, then tore open with a horrific screech. 3 figures in rugged, mismatched mercenary armor dropped into the wreckage, their rifles leveled. Their helmets did little to hide the cold professionalism in their posture.
"Torvin pays well,"
one of them rasped, his voice distorted by his helmet speaker.
But he wants proof. The Empress is circlet. The rest is salvage.
They had no guards. Their pilot was unconscious. It was just them. Hicks didn't have a weapon, but he had a ship that was falling apart around him. He ignored the mercs and lunged for a sparking, severed power conduit dangling from the ceiling. He ripped it free and swung it like an electric whip. It crackled and spat, striking the lead merc's rifle and causing it to discharge into the ceiling. "Get back!" Hicks roared at Varza, shoving her toward the relative cover of the aft compartment. The second merc fired. The bolt seared the air where Hicks's head had been a second before. He dove, rolling behind his shattered console. Varza was scrambling, her regal grace replaced by desperate, determined motion. The third merc tracked her, raising his weapon for a clean shot. No time, no plan, only instinct. Hicks launched himself from behind the console, a whirlwind of brawling fury. He slammed his shoulder into the third merc, sending him staggering off balance. At the same time, he saw the first merc unclip a grenade from his belt. It was a concussion charge, arcing through the smoky air directly toward Varza. He saw her, her eyes wide, framed by smoke and fire, and he moved. He threw himself across the deck, tackling her, wrapping his body around hers, a desperate human shield. He drove them both down behind a piece of bulkhead just as the grenade detonated. The world dissolved into a deafening roar and a wave of pure, crushing force. He felt a searing, white-hot pain in his left arm as shrapnel from the console tore through his jacket and flesh. He grunted, his vision swimming in black spots, but his grip on her did not loosen. Pinned down, the remaining two mercs advancing, the situation was hopeless. Suddenly, Spikes, who had been wedged under a console, let out a piercing shriek of pure, concentrated rage. It wasn't the scattered sparks of joy or the warning shot of fear. This was a focused, controlled blast of adolescent Athelian fury. A lance of brilliant blue-white plasma shot from his mouth. It didn't hit the mercs. It hit the damaged ceiling support above the breach in the hull. With a groan of tortured metal, a huge section of the cockpit ceiling collapsed, burying the two mercenaries under tons of wreckage. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere and Hicks's ragged breaths. He had saved her, and a tiny, angry, armored cub had saved them both. In the sterile white medbay of the rescue vessel, the formal distance between Hicks and Varza had been completely incinerated. A droid had removed the shrapnel and sealed the wound on his arm with a regenerative dermal spray, but it still throbbed with a deep, profound ache. Varza had dismissed the medical staff. She sat on a stool beside his biobed, her imperial gown torn and smudged with lunar dust. She held a cool hydro compress, gently dabbing at the cut on his temple. Her touch was hesitant, careful, a universe away from the iron-willed monarch. The palace walls, had they been there, would have been glowing with a soft, warm, terrified rose. The air was thick with the unspoken. He was no longer her problem. He was the man who had shielded her with his body. She was no longer a symbol. She was the woman he had protected.
"That was a foolish risk,"
she said, her voice a whisper that barely carried in the quiet room. Her amethyst eyes, cleared of dust and fear, searched his face.
"Yeah, well, I'm a fool,"
he managed, his voice hoarse. "It's what I do." A small, sad smile touched her lips.
"Why, Hicks?"
He looked at her, at the genuine confusion and vulnerability there. He didn't have a clever line. He only had the truth that had been growing in the cracks of his cynicism for weeks.
Because the alternative was unthinkable.
She finished cleaning the cut, but she didn't move away. Her hand stayed, her thumb gently stroking his cheek. The psychic bond hummed between them, a powerful current of shared relief, shared horror, and a new, frighteningly intense intimacy. The tension, stretched taut for weeks, finally snapped. She leaned in, closing the small distance. Her lips met his. It was a hesitant, questioning kiss at first, soft and uncertain, then deepening as a tidal wave of shared feeling, the fear, the survival, the impossible connection passed between them. It was electric. It was world-altering. It was real. The pressure on Varsa when they returned was immense. From her perspective, the council chamber was a pit of vipers. Torvin had masterfully reframed the assassination attempt. He twisted the act of treason into proof of her weakness.
"She invites chaos,"
he thundered, his voice ringing in the high hall.
"Her presence in a war zone, her reliance on an unascended human, has drawn assassins to the very heart of the Ascendancy. She is a liability we can no longer afford."
The council, already unsettled by her obsession, and now faced with the specter of mercenaries killing an Empress, was terrified of civil war. They confronted her in a private session, their faces grim. Torvin stood with them, the picture of reluctant, patriotic duty.
"Your Majesty,"
the oldest counselor said, his voice heavy with regret.
"The Ascendancy requires stability. It requires a clear, unshakable line of succession. It requires a demonstration of strength. We implore you, you must enter a bonding marriage with Duke Torvin. It is the only way to unify the court and end this crisis."
She saw the trap close around her. It was her happiness or her empire, her love or her people. It was the same choice her mother had faced. The choice Torvin had built his entire philosophy around. To protect her people, and to protect Hicks from the fallout of the war Torvin would surely start, she had to make the ultimate sacrifice. She had to prove him right. She found Hicks in her chambers. The light from the walls outside was a melancholy, deep violet. Spikes was curled up at her feet, whining softly, sensing the crushing weight of her decision.
"They have demanded I restore stability,"
she said. The Empress mask was back, forged of pain and iron.
"The council has decreed that I must enter a bonding marriage with Duke Torvin."
Hicks stared at her, the warmth from the medbay turning to ice in his veins. "Varsa, no. You can't let him win."
"He has already won,"
she said, turning away.
"He has made this the only choice that prevents civil war."
She took a deep, shuddering breath.
"Your ship has been refueled and fully repaired. The coolant pump is new. Your accounts have been credited with a sum that will ensure you never need to smuggle again."
He took a step toward her. "I don't care about the ship. I don't care about the money."
"You should,"
she said, her voice a frozen plain of ice.
"It is your freedom, the thing you value most."
She finally faced him, her expression a heartbreakingly perfect mask of regal duty.
"Your service is concluded. Go, Hicks Vaclav. Be free."
It was an execution. She was caging herself to set him free. The stray dog had never felt so quiet. The new coolant pump hummed a steady, healthy tune, a mocking counterpoint to the hollow ache in Hicks's chest. The psychic bond was a gaping wound, a constant, throbbing echo of Varza's utter despair and steely resignation. He was one system away. He was free. He was miserable. He landed at the first scuzzy orbital station he could find, a place called the Rusty Mug, needing noise, needing to feel the press of unwashed bodies, needing anything to drown out the silence. He walked into the bar, and his eyes were immediately drawn to the galactic newsfeed playing over the counter. He saw her face. Then he saw Duke Torvin's, his expression a mask of solemn victory.
The Empress has wisely recognized the need for stable leadership,
Torvin was saying.
Her brief, regrettable association with the unascended human is now at an end. His departure is proof that she has put aside childish sentiment and is ready to embrace her sacred duty.
His departure is proof. The words slammed into Hicks. He saw it. The final, brutal move in Torvin's game. His freedom wasn't a gift. It was the weapon she had been forced to turn on herself. He was the evidence that condemned her. Cold, clear rage washed away the misery. He wasn't a pawn. He was a partner. And his partner was in trouble. He strode out of the bar. He powered up his comms unit, routing a signal through 3 layers of anonymizers until he reached a shadowy info broker he knew in the outer rim.
Grizz, he said, I need everything you can find on a mercenary outfit. Small time, probably operating out of the Cinder sector. They fly retrofitted freighters.
He sent the partial ship designation he'd glimpsed during the attack.
And I need it yesterday.
He turned back to his ship. An encrypted message was waiting for him. The sender ID was scrambled, but he knew. Physician Brennan. The message was short. She is choosing the cage. Her choice is a lie. The bonding ceremony is at dawn. The fate of the ascendancy should not be decided by fear. Grizz's reply came through moments later. A data packet. It was a shell corporation, a chain of phantom ownerships, but at the end of the chain was a single name. Andros, Torvin's aide. It was all the proof he needed.
All right, Spikes,
he said, the engines of the stray dog roaring to life.
Strap in. We're staging a rescue and a hostile takeover.
Spikes, who had been a miserable ball of fur, lifted his head and let out a sharp, hopeful chirp. Hicks pointed his ship toward Vayleth, the evidence burning a hole in his datapad. Hicks arrived in orbit around Vayleth with less than an hour to spare. He sent another encrypted message.
Brennan, I'm here. I have proof. I need a way in.
The reply was a set of coordinates for a disused service hangar on the dark side of the Palace Mountain and a simple command. Hurry. He landed the stray dog with barely a whisper. Brennan was there, a hooded figure in the shadows.
The main halls are sealed for the ceremony, the physician said,
his voice tense.
But the old service tunnels are rarely patrolled. They will take you to the back of the high hall. Go. Her Majesty's strength is not in her throne. It is in the truth. Go show them the truth.
The bonding ceremony was an affair of crushing, solemn grandeur. The high hall glowed with a pure, unforgiving white light, the color of tradition. Varza stood on the central dais, a vision of tragic beauty in heavy ceremonial robes. Torvin was beside her, triumphant. The high priest was chanting the ancient rites. Just as the priest raised the ceremonial bonding circlets, the service door behind the grand tapestry at the back of the hall hissed open. A single figure stepped out. He wore a dusty smuggler's jacket over a pair of torn formal silks. Hicks Vaclav walked into the hall. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Guards moved, but he kept walking, his eyes locked on Varza. He stopped at the foot of the dais. In the stunned silence, he began to speak, his voice calm and clear. "There was this treaty," he began, "with the Olgar, and my translator was sabotaged. It announced to the entire room that, to seal the deal, I was required to mount the Empress." A wave of shocked murmur swept the hall. Torvin's face went dark. "And in the middle of this disaster," Hicks continued, his gaze softening as it met Varza's, "in the middle of the chaos and the humiliation, I saw her fight back a smile. I saw the person behind the crown. Someone who knows that sometimes things are just absurd." He then held up his datapad. "And sometimes they are treason. This is the payment ledger from the mercenaries who attacked our ship. It leads directly to Duke Torvin's chief aide. He didn't just create a crisis. He tried to murder his Empress." He tossed the datapad to the captain of the Royal Guard. The evidence was irrefutable. The hall erupted. Tears, hot and real, welled in Varza's eyes. She didn't hide them. A genuine, brilliant smile broke across her face. At her feet, Spikes let out a triumphant chirp, unleashing a shower of harmless golden sparks. "Now," Varza said, her voice ringing with newfound power. She turned to Torvin. "I reject this bond."
"You cannot!"
Torvin sputtered, his face a mask of fury as the guards began to surround him.
"The council!"
"The council was manipulated by a traitor."
Varza cut him off. She faced the stunned nobles, her voice resonating with a power they had never heard. The walls warmed from stark white to a vibrant, hopeful gold.
"I was told my heart was a weakness. I was told that to lead I had to be a fortress. I was wrong."
She looked at Hicks, her eyes full of a love as vast as her empire.
"True strength is not a wall. It is a bridge. It is the courage to trust. My bond with this man is not a flaw. It is the new foundation of the throne."
She took a deep breath.
"There is an ancient, forgotten law from the founding days of the Ascendancy. A law for a consort chosen not by blood, but by deed. A consort protector bound by loyalty and valor. I am reviving that law today."
The vote of no confidence Torvin had been banking on never came. His support evaporated. Torvin and Andros were placed under house arrest, their faction shattered. Yet it remained as a lingering threat for another day. Varza's victory was absolute, but the political war was just beginning. A few days later, Hicks was struggling, not with politics, with his new wardrobe. The robes of the consort protector were heavy, ornate, and utterly impractical. He felt like a walking museum exhibit. He found Spikes in the main living area, hopelessly tangled in a priceless tapestry depicting the founding of the Ascendancy. The cub had gotten his quills caught and was now a thrashing, chirping knot of historical vandalism. "Okay, buddy, easy," Hicks said, trying to gently pry a thread free. "You're unraveling the first Empress's coronation. I think that's a felony." Varza entered, having shed her own formal gowns for a simple tunic. She stopped and took in the scene, her new consort protector on his knees, negotiating with a chaotic gremlin who was actively destroying a national treasure. She laughed. The sound was clear and free, echoing in the grand chamber. She knelt beside him, her shoulder brushing his.
"Let me. There's a spot behind his ears. It makes him go limp."
Amidst the grandeur and the lingering political threats, they were just two people, two partners, dealing with their chaos magnet of a child. Hicks looked at her, at the unrestrained happiness in her eyes, and knew he had found a freedom he had never known existed. He leaned in and kissed her, ready to face the endless challenges, PR disasters, and tapestry repairs of their future. Together,